Okay, remember how I said earlier that the millennials have created all of this new language in order to be able to have difficult conversations regarding race? Not so much about sex, but they have come up with all kinds of language to talk about race. And what has happened, like I said, remember, real conversations about race are dangerous. They get violent, they get bloody. This is in, the United States history. There was literally one Southern senator. You need to Google this. I should know his name, but there was one during the Civil War when there were discussions about, whether or not to free the slaves, and maybe it was before the Civil War. There was a whole lot of tension in America regarding just the problem that slavery was. It was a whole big problem because if you're going to keep people enslaved, there have to be mechanisms in place to do that. And the mechanisms at that time is where we get the modern day police from. Because slave catchers would run all over the country chasing after slaves that were seeking freedom. And they would leave the South, come to the North. But a lot of times when these slave catchers did that, they caused a lot of damage. It was just it's so much drama, confusion, and problems around trying to keep people enslaved, which, that should let you know that you're not supposed to do it. If it's causing all of this disruption, if it's causing all these problems, it's just something you shouldn't do. And a lot of people, a lot of Americans were like, you're causing too much disruption to my white life, chasing after these slaves. I don't like it. That was a lot of pushback from the North. It takes a lot of resources because you're coming up here. You're asking us to help you find your freed slaves. You want us to, so we don't want to do this. That was just one of the problems. We don't want to do this. So, and the abolitionists were saying, these people who are chasing these slaves, they're brutal, they're violent, they're crazy. And so there were two really extreme factions. Most people, and this is how most things are, most people are in the center, they don't care, they just want to live their life. That's how most people are with regard to any political issue. They don't want all the drama, they just want to live their life, right? But when it came to whether to have slavery in America or whether to prohibit slavery in America, there were extreme factions on both sides, and they both went to very extreme. They just went to extremes to try and make their point about it. So, Google John Brown Harper's Ferry to see one really extreme that was taken in order to make the point of, I'm against slavery. So John Brown was an abolitionist who was trying to, I believe there was some kind of standoff in Harper's Ferry, which is in West Virginia, where he was trying to start a war because of some anti-abolitionists. So he was an abolitionist, and some anti-abolitionists, I think, came to his property and blew up his printing press or something, and so he just killed his son. So he had a really, really extreme reaction, what I would call a pikey reaction to that. He just was like, no, I'm not going out like that. I'm going to tear up everybody who has anything to do with this trying to enforce this slavery. And so it didn't end well for John Brown, but I'm just giving you an example. I'm just giving you an example of extreme measures that have been taken in this country to either try to prohibit slavery or to keep it in place. So here we are, 2023. Slavery has technically been legally abolished in the United States. It really hasn't, but that's the technical party line. Again, the language that we use, we say it's over, it's done. And so there's an awareness of just how present slavery is with us today and how it is mainly racially based. Not always, but mainly. And so the millennials have created a lot of language to address this. So one of the terms that have, and this wasn't created by the millennials, I don't think, but they've really made it popular, is white privilege. So I found this book, and it is a New York Times bestseller, and it is called White Supremacy, Me and White Supremacy. Me and White Supremacy. So I'm holding the book up. If I show it to you, it'll appear backwards, but I'll show it to you. Me and White Supremacy. See, New York Times bestseller. Combat racism, change the world, and become a good ancestor. So the foreword is by Robin DiAngelo. So she is a big name. She coined the term white fragility, and we'll get to that. But this author's name is Layla F. Said. And so Saad, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's Saad. So Saad, I would assume. But she just started to do an Instagram challenge in 2020 on Instagram. She was like, I challenge you all to take this white supremacy challenge and try to get a better understanding of white supremacy. So, in the very introduction of this book, she starts talking about white privilege. So she says, more people with white privilege are learning about racial dynamics and social justice terminologies than ever before. And that's true. And 2020, we just had a tremendous, unfortunately, due to what happened with Mr. George Floyd and Officer Chauvin and just that brutal on tape murder, there was a tremendous interest in white privilege, white supremacy, white fragility. These terms just started to pop up everywhere, and everyone wanted to know what they were. And a lot of the terms I didn't even know. And like I said, I've had an entire career in civil rights in that very boring legalistic jargon type of way. So I had to learn these new terms. So more people with white privilege are learning about racial dynamics and social justice terminologies than ever before. They are awakening to the fact that their white privilege has protected them from having to understand what it means to navigate the world as a BIPOC. So again, that's a term that is relatively new. I didn't know what that meant when people started talking about that around 2020. I'm like, what is a BIPOC? And the ways in which they have unintentionally caused harm to BIPOC through racial aggressions. This book is here to change that. It's here to wake you up by getting you to tell the truth. This work is not about white people out there. It is about you, just you. It is important to understand that this is deep, raw, challenging, personal, heartbreaking, and heart-expanding work. This book will challenge you in ways that you have not been challenged before. We are living in challenging times. Okay, so yeah, all of that is true. So she wrote this book intending to get an audience, to speak to an audience of white people who she assumed wanted to take on this concept of certain concepts: white supremacy, white fragility, white privilege. So all of those terms mean very different things. I just want to talk about white privilege and how just that term makes some people, white people usually, very, very angry and uneasy. And you can give them your little intellectual, formal definition of it all that you want to. You can provide all kinds of evidence of the existence of it. What is white privilege? It does not matter. You just telling a white person that they are privileged over a person of color, a lot of white people are going to lose their shit, and they're going to reject that, and they're going to want to fight with you and argue against you. And if someone is that entrenched in their belief, you're going to have to let it go. You're going to have to leave it alone. Trust. There is absolutely nothing that you can do to convince someone who believes that first of all, that they are not privileged, you're not going to get them to believe that they are, and they're going to be offended at the very suggestion that you're making that they are. They're going to be offended. They're going to want to keep arguing with you and telling you, that's not me. I have had a really hard life. Let me tell you about how hard my life was. I am, doing this, doing that. I'm not trying to hear that. And for a lot of white people, that is true. They have had hard lives. They don't feel like they're privileged, and they're not going to hear that. And I understand where they're coming from. If you listen to the lives that some of these people have had and you tell them, you got white privilege, they're going to lose it. Now, some white people are privileged. They are privileged. They know they're privileged. Definitely privileged over any people of color in this country. I'm talking about America. They know it. But because their life has hardship in it, because it's not easy, they too are going to balk at this term, white privilege. So this book, White Privilege and Me, and this is the first assignment in this book. Day 1, You and White Privilege. I think that it provides you with a good intellectual definition. Now, mind you, like I said, it doesn't matter. There are people who will always reject this, and it doesn't matter what you say to them. So what I think you should do is you should know that there are people who just they're not going to have this conversation with you. Real, honest, authentic conversations about racism are difficult. Don't try to have them with people that are closed off and shut down to them, because that is banging your head against a brick wall. So, this book, Day 1, You and White Privilege. I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems, conferring dominance on my group. And this is a quote from Peggy McIntosh. I don't know who she is. But so then this book begins with what is white privilege, this chapter. This first day of confronting white supremacy, the lesson is what is white privilege. We begin this work today with a term we are most familiar with when it comes to white supremacy, white privilege. White privilege is a legislative, systemic, and cultural norm that has existed for a very long time, but it has women's studies scholar Peggy McIntosh, who first coined the term white privilege in her 1988 paper, White Privilege and Male Privilege, a personal account of coming to see correspondences through work in women's studies. A year later, a substantial portion of that package was absurded and published as a paper titled White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. The paper contains 50 examples of white privilege. Okay, so my point is her paper can contain as many examples of white privilege as she wants it to. When you're talking to your ordinary white person about it, they've got up a whole lot of psychological blocks that will not allow them to hear this information or deal with this information in any meaningful way. They're just not. So if you're trying to use that term, and there's been so much pushback and anger and frustration about this kind of terminology. And there's a lot of anger. Like I said, when you're trying to really get to the heart of what is going on with race in America, you're talking about a class system that confers benefits to a group of people, white Americans, who are in the process of losing that privilege. Because you got to understand, in this world, globalization, so much change with the internet, artificial intelligence, there's so much going on right now. So late stage capitalism, we have so many systems breaking down that to say to white people, hey, you're privileged. They don't feel like it because a lot of their privilege is breaking down in the world that we live in. So, you know, you're not going to say to, a drowning man, you don't get this life jacket anymore because, you've had it for so long. That's been your privilege. They're going to be really, really angry and frustrated about that. So, we have a lot going on right now that makes white people as a collective not really are they in a place to hear about, well, you're privileged. So you need to really work on that because everybody, we're living through very, very challenging times where everybody is really and truly being challenged. So I'm not getting into, and I'm not saying that white privilege isn't a thing. It definitely is. Like if you've done the history, if you've just looked at the history of this country, um, critical race theory is another term that has come under tremendous attack. It's just history. It's just the history of what has actually gone on in this country. Google John Brown, Harper's Ferry. See what you learn about that. That's history. Um, people there's definitely been a class system in America that has privileged white citizens over every other kind of citizen that is not white. It is what it is. That's a history of it. But people don't want to have these conversations when they're feeling under attack, when they feel like they're whatever little bit of privilege I have, I'm losing it. So I'm not trying to hear this conversation. What is the answer? I don't know. I don't have any answers, but I'm just letting you know that when you try to have these conversations, and a lot of the millennials want to, a lot of white people now want to, they're like, I want to understand, I want to have these conversations. If you're white and you're trying to have this conversation with other white people, with people in your family, you need to understand what you're butting up against. You're butting up against deeply held beliefs that go to the heart of what I need to keep me safe. And so when you're arguing with someone about that, you're always going to lose because the person isn't going to be rational. They're going to be very, very emotional. So I guess the place to start is in that psychological, emotional place to be like, I understand that this is really important to you, for you to believe whatever the things are that you believe. That's what I used to do when I used to teach. I used to train employees on the equal employment opportunity laws. And like I said, that language is very legalistic. It's very boring. It's very cut and dry. And even in training on that, I would get so much resistance. And I was like, look, I'm not going to fight with you with regard to what you believe. You want to believe that you're better than people of color because you're white? Have at it. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. What I'm here to tell you is what you need to do in order to get your paycheck at your job. So you have to think about how are you going to reframe whatever you're saying about racism, white privilege, white fragility, etc., so people will listen to what it is that you have to say. So that's my take on white privilege. Just letting you know that is not something that a lot of white people, I would say most white people, are going to listen to. Just so you know. See ya.